Doesn't it feel a little bit shit for the government to constantly give these like huge bailouts to these private banks that are making like big money?
But it's not a bailout to the bank. All the shareholders, all the debt holders are absolutely 100% going to be wiped out.
Saying you have to build extra technologies out if you want to innovate on a single point.
You have to build out chargers anyways, but now you're piggybacking off their infrastructure. They spent all this money building out their infrastructure, and now you're saying that you should just be able to use it for free and get all their investment.
No one is saying for free. We're just saying that like by you saying they've invested in infrastructure, we agree, but they're investing in that infrastructure to protect their industry, which makes it not competitive.
Okay, Ragepope.
Right. What's your thoughts on the bank run happening on the Silicon Valley Bank? It's not supposed to be that big of a deal, right? Like they've got the assets to pay stuff off. It just kind of sucks for the investors of the bank. I think that's my understanding of it. That there's no threat to customer deposits. Am I right or wrong on that?
Really?
What?
Really?
Don't you have some more noise to make? This guy's GM at 4978 MMR. What? No. Come on. We're in a bathtub. What's going on with your mic?
I'm literally using the exact same mic with the exact same strings I was in here last time. I'll get the setting.
Okay, never mind. It sounds fine. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so Silicon Valley Bank is actually like extremely dangerous. Oh man, the biggest issue that we have basically with banks is that they're supposed to match short-term liabilities, right, with long-term lending. And the FDIC is supposed to be there to back them. And they set rules that banks are supposed to follow. But by allowing Silicon Valley Bank to fail, they basically said that everybody's, you can just bank on any bank at any point in time, and they're not going to back anything. Even if you're following the appropriate FDIC rules and everything else, they're basically saying that you can have a coordinated attack and put on any bank, and you can basically short anyone to the ground. So,
yeah.
I don't know. That's extremely scary to me. I don't know why you would say it's not a huge deal.
Did you say something about a wheel?
I don't know why you don't think it's a big deal.
Oh, big deal. I don't know, man. Wait, hello?
Hear me? Hello?
Oh, wait, almost. Oh, shit. I have no idea what you just said. You're literally unintelligible. You sound like you're at the bottom of the ocean. But now it sounds like you fixed your mic. What'd you do?
I literally haven't done anything.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right, well, listen. Go listen to the VOD for the last, 20 seconds, okay? But now you sound good, so, okay. Try it again.
Okay, so the big thing with Silicon Valley Bank is that they were one of the most highly capitalized banks in the United States. Mm-hmm. They followed all of the FDIC rules in terms of deposits, and yet they basically got wiped out by a coordinated action. More or less what happened was a classic bank run wherein there was an email that got sent out to every single Silicon Valley investor, and all of the VC funds. They all pulled their money at the same time, and there's a liability mismatch between the basically the people with the money in the bank that wanted to pull their money out, and then their assets, which are basically lending long. So the FDIC has been pushing banks to buy a lot of these loans and mortgages and everything like that. And it's not healthy for the banks for them to just let them go under. You're just basically going to end up with a lot of consolidation in the banking industry, and then you're going to end up with a lot of these smaller banks basically folding and going under because they can't compete and because they won't actually be backed by the FDIC when you do have healthy balance sheets.
Wow.
Steve is this dude was on the set of the last Avatar movie.
Well, it looks like you're in the middle of something. But
well, I have to look up and fact check everything. From what I remember reading was that the issue was just that they hold on, Jesus fucking Christ. I think the issue is, I thought I'd read an article, I don't know if it was Wall Street Journal or Business Insider or whatever, that they just overestimated basically how safely they could perform, assuming that interest rates weren't going to rise in the way that they did, and that was kind of like they took advantage of that for too long, and then they got basically fucked for it. But you're giving me like a totally different story, so I have to read more.
Yeah, so there's a confluence of things that went on. So the first one is interest rate risk is not required to be looked at by any federal regulations. And so you're right, they were basically trying to squeeze out any sort of inkling of profit that they could get, because for the last 15 years, basically rates have been extremely low. And the thought was that you're going to be in a low interest rate environment for a while. And because of that, the current regulatory rules basically say you don't have to account for it for, a 5%, a historically high increase in interest rates. And because of that, they did get caught out. But the FDIC was the one the entire time telling them to, not just them, but banks across the entire board, to issue fewer loans and buy more securities or more bonds, I guess. That was a huge push from the FDIC to these banks, because the thought was that having these mark-to-market securities is going to be simpler and easier to mark on your balance sheets and to help with wind downs and liquidations. And so, one, they didn't have any interest rate.
Why isn't every single bank in the U.S. having this problem right now?
Because they didn't have like 70% of their investor base basically running to get money out.
Can you link me an article or a story showing that like this happened? That there was like an actual
sure.
like coordinated run on the...
Yeah, so here, I'll just link you FT.
Oh God, can you give me a screenshot of the article instead of linking me one of the only publications you have to like actually paywall in to like read the entire thing for?
Well, it's all right. Sure, I'll find you something else.
Thanks.
Because okay. So, what do you want? Wall Street Journal or no?
Or give me like a screenshot or an archive or something I can read without having to go through fucking 20 plugins. Okay. Did the article you linked me actually talk about this bank run, or is it just going to give me a general
yes,
overview?
yeah. It's literally the title of the Fortune article. Silicon Valley Bank may be victim of first social media bank run.
Okay,
right?
link me.
It's in the Destiny's Room chat.
Can you? Okay, hold on.
Yeah, I'll
Never
jump
mind.
in and share
Okay.
again.
The Fortune one?
Yep.
What is this bank?
Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah, what do they do? What services do they offer?
So the biggest thing that they do is they basically hold all the money for most of the VC funds out in the Silicon Valley. So if you're raising a VC fund...
Wait, I don't believe you. How do they make money?
So they take people's assets and then they either lend them out through loans, or for the most part, they buy bonds.
So they do is buy bonds, and that caused them to massively miss earnings?
So basically the interest rate rise, right? So they're buying long dated bonds. So, 5 years, 10 years out. And so with the rate increase and then the increase in rate increases towards the end of the year, and then the few that are coming up, all those basically decrease the value of their bonds, and that's causing them to miss all their earnings. And then they had to sell off those bonds at depreciated prices to meet customer withdrawals.
Okay. So then what's the issue?
So the issue is that basically, one, the FDIC was pushing a lot of these banks into buying the same types of securities. So when everybody was needing to raise capital by selling off these bonds, you have...
Wait, explain that more? What do you mean? Or can you like the FDIC is saying like you need to only buy...
So the FDIC basically regulates every bank, right? And they say in order to have a healthy portfolio, you need to have this sort of composition of your assets in order to meet your depositor liabilities, in order to remain insured with us and remain in good standing, and then we'll give you an assessment of your balance sheet. And so for the past few years, they've been pushing purchases of treasuries and purchases of other marketable securities as opposed to giving loans, because those are liquid assets, because you can go out and sell them. There's a clear and transparent market price, and you don't need to go to an auction for them. So if I issue a loan to somebody to buy a house, well, that's not a marketable security. It's going to be less liquid to find a buyer for that than if I go out and buy a bundle of mortgage-backed securities.
Okay.
So they've been pushing those, and then as there's kind of been a cash crunch because these securities have been dropping in price because of interest rate risk, everybody across the board needs to sell them all at the exact same time, right? In order to meet capital requirements for all the banks. As interest rate goes up, if they didn't do any interest rate hedging, they all have to do it.
So what was the solution to this then? What would have prevented this from happening?
So The first thing would have been just a guarantee by the FDIC for all the assets in the banks because they had an appropriate portfolio that was supposedly well capitalized. The second thing is
wait, hold on. Let's talk through each of these, okay? Because that sounds like a huge deal what you're just saying. Has the FDIC ever fully insured the deposits of any financial institution?
No, not yet.
Then why in this case would that ever be the case? Why would on government dollars would we ever fully insure a bank that's making money off of deposits?
So it wouldn't be on government dollars. There's appropriate assets in the bank for everything that's in there. Should you let it run off for 2 or 3 years? The Fed should be acting and the FDIC should be acting as lenders of last resort, and they should be able to recover everybody's assets and make a profit just by retaining stability in the
I feel like
ecosystem.
I might be crazy, but I feel like at that point we should just fully nationalize all of the banks and just have one United States banking service. If the FDIC is going to fully insure every single bank such that there's a run, I feel like that incentivizes so much insane behavior. Past basically, as long as you maintain like the minimum FDIC requirements, now you can act in literally whatever way you want, and the government's going to fully insure everything. Why not just like fully nationalize every bank at that point?
I don't know if there would necessarily be a huge issue nationalizing a lot of them or providing a national bank for people to go in that's fully regulated. But if you're just going to say that you're going to back banks and put these requirements on them and then not actually back them when they're meeting or exceeding what your minimum requirements are, I don't see what the point is. All that's going to do is cause everybody to go to every other bank and withdraw the money, which was the whole point of the Federal Reserve System, is that you have a set of banks that are backed by the Federal Reserve that aren't going to go down for just like a bank run. That's like literally the whole purpose of the system, is that you don't have massive
was the
coordinated
purpose of the
banks.
system to protect commercial deposits in commercial like risky tech startup banks, or was it to protect average citizen deposits so there wouldn't be an average consumer run on banks? We've got citizens that are losing like $5,000 in savings or life savings. Was the FDIC really instated to protect banks that were investing in tech startups?
So the banks aren't investing in tech startups.
Wasn't that the whole point of the it's called the Silicon Valley Bank? I thought they like specialized in like startups, especially in the tech industry.
Well, the startups put their money there. They didn't take the money and invest it into the startups.
Oh, so this bank it doesn't do any type of investment stuff at all?
Correct, yes. Yeah,
right.
it just has a uniquely concentrated risk of just most of its depositor assets are coming from the Silicon Valley banks. And then they had... can't remember what it was, but basically they had like sweetheart deals where they said, if you put all of your money into this bank, well, then we'll give you preferred lines of credit, right? So we'll expand your credit or lower your interest rates so we can guarantee that we keep your assets here. And so because of their unique customer base, they basically had a bank run all at once. An email went out to these VC lists and the telegrams and everything else that just basically said, oh, there's rumors that Silicon Valley is insolvent, pull your money out. And then just everybody went on their app and just tried to wire out. And just
you said rumors, but it seemed like what's the difference in what you're talking about now versus Elon blaming short sellers for trying to take down Tesla? Like, it sounds like people were saying that it seems like there's a worry that these institutions might be insolvent, and then there's a lot, and then it comes out that they massively miss earnings, and then and now it looks like they kind of are insolvent. Like, is that not like a legitimate concern, or?
It's kind of a legitimate concern, but there's a massive difference between affecting the stock price of a corporation, which only minorly affects certain issuances if you need capital, and certain interest rates, which should be more or less immaterial to corporations, versus having to fire sale assets that everybody in the same industry is going to have to sell if there's a bank run on more banks. So most banks in the nation, especially the regional ones, will have a similar mix.
To be clear, customer deposits are all okay, aren't they? Or are they not?
At Silicon Valley Bank?
Yes. Like, they might be having a liquidity issue, but they're not insolvent, are they?
No, they are insolvent now because they're in receivership. No one knows how much money they're going to be able to get out of selling all the assets. So what they're doing right now, they're in FDIC receivership. All the assets that they have, they're going to the market. The bid deadline, I think, is coming up in in a couple hours, or maybe it already passed. But the bid deadline for that is today. They're basically taking all of the bank's assets that they own. They've gone out to everybody and said, all right, you can bid on the bank as an entirety. You can bid on different portions of its loan packages, different portions of its bonds, and that's all being sold off this weekend. And then they're going to return whatever they can get to the depositors. The second issue that they have is that everybody who went and wired their money out before close of business Thursday is getting priority. So if you wired out money Thursday, you'll get all of your money out. If you left your money in the bank, you're going to get a certain percentage of the deposits. It's looking like that's going to be somewhere around 80%, 80 to 90%. But they're basically incentivizing further bank runs. If you're a business that has over 250,000 in the bank, if there's any sign of trouble at your bank, they're telling you basically to run to the bank and take your money out, not to stay calm. Which kind of like defeats the whole purpose of this system, right?
Huh. Okay. How does a bond... when a bond matures, you're guaranteed to get what's printed on the front of it, no? Or
correct. Well, for a treasury, unless it's a corporate asset, which may,
obviously,
go
yeah.
into bankruptcy.
But
yes,
they were buying T-bonds, right? They weren't just buying bonds from companies or municipalities.
They were buying corporate bonds and treasuries. Yes.
Oh, they were buying corporate bonds
and some MBSs. Yeah.
So there is no guarantee that they're on the maturation day they're going to receive what's on the printed front, or.
Yeah, but they're generally very high quality. The problem is that they're long duration, and the interest rates going up has caused their current mark-to-market price to go down, which is why they're looking at a loss for customers.
Hold on, wait. Can you explain this? Interest rates going up means mark-to-market price is going down. Is that because treasury bonds are becoming more attractive, so the riskiness of the corporate bonds, the volatility isn't being compensated properly with the interest rate, or what? What do you mean by that?
Well, no. So let's say that so every bond is issued in a denomination of like 100, and so it'll pay you, let's say, 1% per year, and so it trades at par of 100, and then it gives you 1% every year for 10 years. But now that the interest rates are higher, well, why would you buy a corporate bond at 100 that's only going to pay 1% when you can buy a treasury that's going to give you 5%?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I said, that like because treasury bonds are becoming more attractive, it's making the corporate bonds worth less, so the mark-to-market value is going to fall, because why the fuck would anybody buy it?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, yeah, maybe I just
Okay.
Yeah. But yes, yeah. So in order to do it, the par value goes down from 100 to 95 or 96. And so it's not that the riskiness of it necessarily goes down. It's just that why would you ever buy something at 1% when you can get 5%, even if they're equally risky? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and so I guess like the issue is that there's just like that maturity mismatch that you're always going to have with banks, and now it seems like it's incentivized for everybody to, whenever there's even a slight crisis at your bank, to pull everything out, because you'll be made whole, and the people who get left in or who stay in are the ones that are going to be hurt.
Well, who's making them whole right now? What do you mean by that?
Okay, so if you sent a wire out before Thursday or before a close Thursday, the bank was still technically solvent. They hadn't gone into receivership, and so they're going to process all those wires. So if you said take all my money out of my account and you put it in on the app, then you're going to get 100% of your money. If you said, oh no, things are going to be fine. Why are you guaranteed to
get 100% of that money? Where's that coming from? Who's making it whole?
Fed wire rules, because the bank wasn't in receivership.
So the FDIC is going to guarantee all of those transactions, even if the company was insolvent?
Well, it wasn't insolvent until they announced their insolvency, which was after close Thursday. I guess before Market Friday.
It wasn't insolvent until they announced their insolvency. That sounds like The Office. Like you're like declaring bankruptcy.
So they had money in the account, right?
No, I understand, but I'm saying like theoretically, everybody wired their shit on a Thursday. Are you saying the FDIC would have guaranteed that all of those wires out would have been honored, or?
Yes, unless there was actually not enough capital for everybody. If literally everybody wired their money out, then it would be pro rata, I think, or maybe on a first come first served basis. I don't remember the exact.
Okay, so it's already technically on pro rata. It's just that there's enough money to guarantee it all, right?
Yes, right. Yeah, and so that basically lets you skip the line. If you chose to pull your money out and participate in the bank run, well then you're protected. But the people who didn't participate in the bank run are hurt by it. Yeah, it just seems insane to me that that everyone has all these issues with the big corporate banks and the consolidation and the failure of smaller banks to kind of be opened, and then you have the government basically saying, all right, well, if you're staying in, we're just going to support the bank run. The bank's going to go under, and then we're just going to incentivize more bank runs against lower capitalized banks in the future.
So what was the solution here?
So one, you just need better rules. There needs to be interest rate risk rules in terms of hedging and in terms of maturation of your treasuries. The second thing is, I really do think that Silicon Valley Bank, or not Silicon Valley, the FDIC and the Federal Reserve System should be backing in to guarantee the Silicon Valley Bank to stop more runs in the future, because the Fed has the ability to take possession of all of those assets and let them run off over the next few years and make everybody whole, and then actually probably come out at a huge profit for the government. So it's not even really a bailout, more so than it is just acting in the best interest of banks.
Doesn't it feel a little bit shit for the government to constantly give these like huge bailouts to these private banks that are making like big money?
But it's not a bailout to the bank. All the shareholders, all the debt holders are absolutely 100% going to be wiped out. The depositors are small businesses for the most part. And then
but by guaranteeing these assets, you're empowering these banks to make a fuck ton of money, right? You can say that, oh, look, we're saving the consumers, which is technically true, but the consumers are the people that these banks are making money on, right? Which allows them to make a lot of money. So by having the government like fully insure and back that, you're essentially like you're using.
But they've just lost all whatever $20 billion that they had in capital at the beginning of this year in their bank. So
sure. But I'm saying that if all of it was like guaranteed by the government, you're just like, it feels like you're just underwriting. You're using the government essentially to underwrite like all these private banks. I don't know. It just feels kind of like, what the fuck? I want a deal like that.
Sure, but you're requiring them to have all these stricter, terms and conditions of their portfolio. I guess I don't see how it's underwriting all the risk if you're mandating their portfolio structures are appropriate. I don't see how it's taking on any.
Sure, I guess. So you believe right now that the portfolio structure was inappropriately.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
They were buying 10-year bonds at 0% or like 1.5%.
What do you do to like? It feels like underwriting these more appropriately would require them to basically read the future for what the Federal Reserve is going to do, though, no?
No, not necessarily. They could have bought basically interest rate swaps that would have paid out. It would have cut to the profitability in the short term. But if there was a pretty large increase in prices, then it would have, paid out, and they wouldn't have had that risk. I think concentration in these type of instruments, just getting everybody into these market securities just adds concentration risk across the board, because if there was more bank runs, say like Fifth Third Bank or some other regional banks, they would all be selling the same securities into the market at the same time and just depressing the price. I think that's pretty inappropriate. And then I don't know. I don't know where else I would go with that, but it just seems like if you're going to mandate these portfolios to look like this and then act on basically the best interest of short sellers as opposed to the American public, it just creates a lot of bad incentives that come together. Because again, like if you take a look at a lot of the businesses that are being shut down by this, so like Etsy is like a big one that's being shut down. There's I can't remember all of them, but there's like literally just like probably 15 or 20,000 people on payroll that are uncertain if they're even going to be able to make payroll this week because of the bank going under. And that just like doesn't seem like super appropriate to have all sorts of small businesses impacted.
Yeah, you say that, but the only reason their payroll is uncertain is because it probably sounds like the businesses were like reinvesting and capitalizing those funds rather than holding it more for payroll, right? So there's people like getting like it's not like poor customers. They had what?
They just had money in a bank account. If you have like 100 employees and you're paying them $5,000 a month, that's like 500,000 sitting in your bank account.
So they were using this bank, the Silicon Valley Bank, was just being used as a normal bank. It could have just been Wells Fargo. They're not getting any extra services or any type of money or greater interest rates or special money market deposit accounts or anything like that. It was just a normal ass bank to these people, the way that they were using it.
Yes, to most of them, yes.
Why were they? Why? Yeah. What is the incentive to use that bank over like any other? I guess.
Because I guess they have preferred lines of credit, and it's just easier to open up.
Okay, wait, hold on. What does a preferred line of credit mean?
So that means you can get a lower rate of interest on your loans. So like if you say, oh, hey, I run payroll through this bank, I'm going to leave, $500,000 or $1 million a month to pay my people, then I can get access to loans easier and cheaper or in greater value. I can potentially get, my bank account opened without having or credit cards or whatever, because even though my business is young, I don't have the line of credit there, and I'm not going to have to personally guarantee it. But I mean, again, these are just like normal bank things, I guess. They may have preferred terms, but that doesn't really differentiate the business that they're doing there. Like, I don't think there's any fundamentally different thing that's happening for having an account with Silicon Valley Bank versus like a regional bank versus like a JP Morgan.
Yeah, I just don't understand why you would use that bank, I guess.
Well, I mean, why would you really choose between like any really different bank? It's just mostly going to just be like the customer service aspect for the most part, right? And then maybe a little bit on interest rates, but it's just going to be whatever's nearby or whatever's.
Sure.
No. And then, yeah. Right, and then I guess, man, did you see that? What is it? Gonzalo Lira, your good friend Coach Red Pill, finally got deported from Ukraine.
Nice. Where is he going back to? Is he even a U.S. citizen, or is he another one of those fucking Canadians that somehow make their way into the United States?
I'm not sure. I know the SBU got him for reporting Ukrainian positions to the Russians. So.
And he doesn't get like prosecuted for that or anything? That's just like a normal.
Well, he did, but he made a deal where he turned over 5 other collaborators in exchange for getting deported. So, I guess they thought that was a good deal. He literally just like went and snitched to the Ukrainians to save himself instead of his moral principled values of being a strong independent Russian supporter. So that's I think that's really funny. I guess my last question then is just like kind of about the merger stuff. You said you don't think any company should be allowed to buy another company. I don't think that's exactly what you meant or what you said.
Just like huge companies. I don't like the structure right now of like my path to success is just getting big and then selling to like a really fucking huge company. I feel like that's a shitty area to be in. Because it deprives us potentially of like a ton of other possibly new cooler companies that like can't ever exist now because people's goals are just to basically sell to Amazon or Google.
Sure, to some extent, but I guess the thought process is that who other than like very large businesses can like take these niche technologies to scale, right? Whatever these improvements are, if you're like if you're a small business, right, you're not really worried about saving a quarter cent on like every transaction. If you're just running like a grocery store or like a gas station, right?
Does every single business that exists have to be like infinitely scalable instantaneously in order to be successful?
No, it doesn't. But if you can improve efficiencies across the board, I don't see why it wouldn't be desirable. If you're developing new technologies,
isn't that an argument to nationalize literally every single company and let the government run anything? Like if it's so much more efficient to incorporate it, shouldn't Google just be like the one company that run 50 million things, right? Like
sure, yeah, if the government could run everything perfectly efficiently, then yes, it would. It would be. So
like, I feel like Google and Amazon probably have higher GDPs than like a lot of countries. That'd be my guess, right? Like, so why are they like uniquely positioned to run 50 trillion different horizontally and vertically integrated things, but like the government's not?
I don't think they necessarily are in a unique position compared to the government to run those, but I just, if they're able to compete in those marketplaces, I don't see why not, as long as they're not exercising their monopoly power to snuff out innovation in those areas, which I don't think anybody is even close.
How do you know that? What, you don't think we could have had other operating systems, other search engines, other like online retailers?
We do have other search engines. We have several search engines.
I think you have like one. Who?
Bing,
What is Bing's market share compared to
Baidu.
what is Bing's market share compared to Google? Also, the only reason Bing has any market share whatsoever is because of the vertical integration with Microsoft. So I mean, like, even that's a bad example. But we'll say even for Bing that does have that, can take advantage of that vertical integration. What do they have? Or horizontal, I guess technically. What do they have market share wise?
Bing, I guess it's only 3%. I didn't realize it was that bad for it. But I
So
guess
what
the
is
question
Google,
is,
like 94%?
Yeah, 93.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter if it's not harming anybody.
But you don't know if it's harming
see why
anybody, right? You don't know what other operating systems we could have had or what other search engines we could have had, right? That's true of any monopoly. Like, well, am I hurting anybody? I don't know. It's hard to know, right?
I guess the question is, how are you ever going to demonstrate these alternate universes? Like, it doesn't make sense when you're getting these massive economies of scale and efficiencies. Like, maybe...
Again, when you say massive economies of scale and efficiency, you're justifying monopolies, right? Like, everything should
Yes,
just be
yeah,
monopolized by the state at that
monopolies
point.
are necessarily fine. Like, there are some things that do make sense as monopoly.
We're not talking about
monopolies.
things that have, like, geographic restrictions or areas where monopolies are essential. I don't think it's essential that we have a monopoly for software operating systems. Or I don't think it's essential that we have a monopoly for a search engine.
But you get... it's like this network effect that goes up exponentially as you get more and more people using it, and as you get a service more and more refined. If you're running 3 parallel search engines or 5 and you're doing the same sorts of optimizations to all of them, or if you have, 1 million people on a social network versus like 100 million.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with any of what you're saying. I understand there's obviously gains to be had. I like the fact that my Gmail and my cell phone and my computer all fucking fuck each other and work together. That's fine. But what I'm saying is that argument can be used to infinitely justify like every kind of like monopoly ever, right? That we should there should be one company running literally everything because the integration is so good. But I don't think we'd...
Well, everything that there's a natural monopoly in, sure.
But yeah, but I don't think there's a natural monopoly in software. For like a search
Why
engine
is
or
there
like
not?
social media. Why would there be? Because you can have like 5 different social medias. It's okay.
Because you have social network effects, right? If I'm selling something at a marketplace, and I'm taking the same time and effort to sell, one banana stand, if there's 1,000 people that go to that marketplace, I'm going to sell a lot more bananas than if 5 people walk by it every day. It's the same thing is absolutely true with social media. If everybody was on one social media, and you could have the same impact, you would just go to the biggest one.
Yeah, but what if you get banned from that
reason.
one social media? Or what if that one social media implements a policy that you don't like? Now you have no alternatives and you're fucked, right? What if there was no
Sure.
Twitter? Any girl that posts nude pictures on Twitter can't do that on Instagram anymore. Or what if you get banned from Facebook and Facebook is running videos and everything? Well, now you have no like video platform anymore. Like, or what if there could be like cool, innovative? What if there could
That doesn't sound like a problem. That doesn't sound like a problem that's an antitrust problem. That sounds like a problem that should be dealt with either through legislation or through the court system and not antitrust.
Why would we legislate all of this when it could probably be solved by like market forces?
How are you going to solve it with market forces if you're just creating a bunch of smaller markets?
How? Because of competition. Isn't that literally the whole point of capitalism? The idea that like multiple firms will compete to like deliver products to the public that they want?
Sure, yeah. But, oh man, let me think, how do I explain this? So, all right, so when you're just having 1 or 2 people banned from these places, it doesn't necessarily make a market force that is going to necessitate innovation. If there's issues with certain things not being allowed on a platform, let's say Facebook takes over, then there necessarily will be another corporation that takes over.
Unless that company has almost like
niches.
monopolized the industry because there's only like 3 social media platforms. I think it makes it really hard for another company to come in and take over. That's kind of my whole point.
I don't think so. I mean, look, we had MySpace. MySpace was the biggest. Facebook took over. You have TikTok, Instagram, Vine.
The era of MySpace is like fundamentally different, I think, than the area we live in technology right now, right?
Wait,
like,
what?
Like the internet barely existed in like 2004. Compared to how ubiquitous it is now. I think cell phones changed a lot. Like there's a lot more people on the internet now. The power and strength of like a large company today. Like for instance, how long did MySpace last? I'm curious.
Probably 10 to 15 years if I had to guess, or at its MySpace. So it's been around 19 years. I would say it probably went out around 2010, 2015, I guess.
2015?
At the latest, before it was totally, absolutely dead.
Don't you think it was probably out of style quite a bit earlier than that? I would say, right?
Yeah. Well, 2010, yeah, was my guess, because 2007 was the $12 billion valuation. In 2012, 2009 was when Facebook got bigger than MySpace. Yeah, so it probably was 2010 to 2012 then. It's probably the end of MySpace.
And then how long has Facebook been in existence for?
2004. So it started like half a year after MySpace, or a year after MySpace.
Do you think that Facebook is going to be in existence for about as long as MySpace was? Or do you think it's going to like 2x or 3x? Like, I think the scale of everything is changing quite a bit now.
I think Facebook's going to stay around mostly because of the user base, but it seems to be losing a lot of people to competitor platforms. That's why they tried to buy Instagram to compete with TikTok and those other, Twitter to some extent. I don't think Facebook itself is necessarily going to be as dominant, and I don't know. It just seems like it's losing share year over year over year.
Wait,
the big thing that they have is just advertising.
Facebook is?
Yes. Facebook stopped having growth, I think, last year.
Stopped having growth and losing significant parts of user base are two kind of different things, but...
Yeah, I mean, it starts in, I don't know, it starts like one thing at a time. Some companies fell faster than others. Like GE was basically an unstoppable corporation at one point, and now it's basically dead. Just because it doesn't burn out in 10 years, like something else, doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be short-lived and can't be competed against. I don't know. It just seems wild that you would say that something has been dominant for 10 years and now it just deserves to have antitrust taken against it when there hasn't even probably been that much time to compete against it.
10 years is like a fucking forever in internet time.
Yeah, but 10 years is nothing in normal corporation time.
Yeah, but we're not living on normal corporation time. We're not living in internet time. For software companies, I probably wouldn't evaluate them by normal standards, right?
I mean... the only long-standing software companies that we really have are Apple, Microsoft, and IBM for the most part. Intel maybe. Most of the other hardware companies have died, or software companies have come in and out. I don't necessarily see that they've even been around as long as Ford or GM or anything else. I don't see that as an issue, that we just don't have new companies coming up and burning out every few years. That just seems insane turnover. I don't know.
I mean, I think you keep saying like it seems insane, but like I think it's insane that we've had like one operating system for our computers since the inception of computers. Like that level of vertical integration is kind of fucking crazy to me. And I don't know how like anybody who's like a capitalist would like defend that. Like it seems like very clearly like anti-competitive. Like really nobody else in the world could come up with like alternate operating systems. It was just one. Like Microsoft solved it. They were the first guys, and that's it. Like that seems
Apple
wild
has
to me.
a pretty huge share. Linux is getting a very massive share.
What is Apple's market share for desktops? Don't throw iOS at me, because iOS I'm going to throw back at you and say, well, that's probably that they share like a duopoly with fucking Android, because I'm pretty sure Android and Microsoft OS,
sure.
or not Microsoft OS, Android and iOS probably have like 95% of market share.
Sure. I guess 2022, Apple's looking at 17% of all PC units.
Wait, what did you say?
And that's 17% as of the end of 2022.
You said PC units, so I think you're including laptops in that, is my guess.
Yes, yes. And then in terms of cloud, Windows is being replaced by Linux. That's basically happened.
Yeah, sure. Cloud. So for consumer desktops, I think we're just
sure, but doesn't it also leads to a lot of efficiency where you're not having to develop?
I know it's efficient. I understand. Yeah. Where's Econoboi? I think I said exactly this is how this conversation is going to be. You're just going to throw at me like the upsides of some of the efficiency gains of being a monopoly, which I agree they're there, but like I just think it's kind of shitty that we basically said that no more competition allowed because of some of these upside efficiency gains from being a monopoly. That seems like kind of shitty to me.
But we're not disallowing competition. There is competition, and people are.
There
winning
is no
in other
competition.
sectors.
Why would you wouldn't want to compete? You want to sell to these larger companies. That's it, right? Who's here like saying like, oh, I want to make like a competing OS. Nobody's saying that. If you have any good product that works on desktop, or any good product that works in software, your goal is to sell to one of these like 3 huge giants. Like that's your goal every time.
I guess.
Nobody wants to compete with Google or Amazon. You want to be bought by Google or Amazon. I think that's like fundamentally like anti-consumer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like that if Google or Amazon or whatever they can just invest in it themselves and build it out themselves.
They don't ever do that though, do they?
They do a lot. They have a lot of internal teams that like build things. Like if you look at Alphabet's entire, structure, they were originally just Google, and then they had a bunch of other venture arms basically inside of it, and then they split themselves into the holding corporation Alphabet, and then Google the search engine, in order to actually separate out all their different investment arms that they were doing.
Why didn't Facebook just build another like social media platform? Why did they buy Instagram?
Didn't they try? I thought Facebook had something else that was supposed to compete with Instagram, and they just couldn't.
Sure, but I mean, like that, like so they couldn't compete, so they just bought a competitor. Like that just seems like really shitty. So rather than having like Instagram operating as its own kind of like autonomous, like another social media, they got bought by Facebook.
Sure, yeah, but I don't know if Instagram would have been viable on its own anymore, right? They didn't have the ad infrastructure that Facebook did, and that's really what's driving their profitability.
But look at what you just said. That's another example of like a vertical like integration that's like crushing competition. Why does Facebook have its own advertising entire like structure built out, right? Something that they can use to basically force competitors to sell to them. Like you can't compete. You don't have like other businesses that we own as part of our business.
Why should they
now
be
my business is going
to sell their data to somebody else to be able to use?
I didn't.
When they can do
because it's
something to compete. You're saying that they're no longer allowed to compete because they're so large. You're saying that because they created a Facebook platform, instead of going to a traditional advertiser, they're not allowed to make their own advertising platform.
I'm saying that if you're telling me, because it's antitrust, because if you're telling me that like other companies can't even compete now because of the vertical integration that Facebook advertising has with Facebook, the social media platform, and I was like, oh, cool. Well, I guess we're just done getting more social.
So you'd be fine if they were allowed to sell their data to other advertisers?
If they wanted to sell their data to other advertisers, I
because
guess.
Then the other advertisers could compete with the same data.
If they wanted to, sure. I'm just saying the idea of them like owning like a media. The idea of them owning like advertising and social media just seems like you're like.
How is that any different than like television or radio?
If there was a TV station that like owned and did all of its own ads and also did like all of its own like broadcasting and like had its own like studios for entertainment and everything, I'd probably say the same thing.
I mean, that's the way that most of them have been run for a while. As far as I'm aware, like even just like Spotify has their own like ads, right? You can just pay Spotify, they'll create ads for you, put it on their platform. They're creating the ads, they're creating user data and everything else. And I wouldn't say that's a monopoly either. I guess I just think it's like a lot scarier when you have all the data just flowing around to whoever wants to buy it for whatever reason or not reason. And I think that company should just be allowed to compete wherever, as long as you're not, and ultimately ending up harming consumers. I don't think it really matters if you want to integrate vertically or horizontally. It just fundamentally seems just like a violation of like your right to association and your right to free speech.
You're just justifying monopolies again. Like every single thing you say is just justifying monopolies.
Because monopolies aren't necessarily just bad. Like
I think monopolies are almost necessarily bad. Yeah, the only time that's why you need like an exception to say like, well, in this case, a monopoly is okay. But by definition, I feel like in a capitalist society, a monopoly is bad because it discourages the primary function of a market, which is to have competing firms delivering good products to us. That's like why capitalism is supposed to work, is because firms compete. Otherwise, if just one firm, they say, I'm going to charge $5 million for a cheeseburger. And it's like, oh, well, fuck me. As long as two people can afford it, it's worth it for the firm to operate this way.
No, because now you're putting your market power, which should be the government's burden to demonstrate that the monopoly is actually harming people when you're charging $5 million for a cheeseburger.
Yeah, but you're not even acknowledging any harms. You're just saying like, oh no, like it's okay because
there could
there's
be
all these
potential
gains.
harms, but you would never accept that there could hypothetically be harms, and then act on it. Like you're just proposing hypothetical harms which may or may not exist and which may or may not happen. And it could be that in these alternate universes that things are significantly worse by allowing by forcing competition. Products could just be worse because you don't have that one person.
I mean, in a hypothetical harm, that's what all monopolies are, is demonstrating hypothetical harms, right?
They're not demonstrating anything.
Well, no, I'm saying that like if you want to prove that like a monopoly is bad, like by definition, you're kind of talking like hypothetical harms, no? You're trying to say that like it could be better otherwise if there was no monopoly here, right?
Yes, but those are demonstrable. Saying
How?
that there could be innovation. What do you mean?
How could you demonstrate that there could be innovation?
I don't think you can demonstrate that there would otherwise be more innovation.
Well, then how do you escape when I'm saying that, like, for proving any monopoly, you're demonstrating you're
Okay,
always talking
so
about, like, hypothetical
for
models.
any monopoly that you look at, you can very easily show what the market price would be without the presence of that corporation in, and then you can show.
Wait, you can very easily show what a price would be without it? How?
You hire some economists and they do the analysis for you.
Really?
Yes, yeah. Oh, I mean, that's what the FTC does.
Sure,
And
that's what
a
you
lot of people
do, but that's a far cry from, like, can very easily demonstrate. I'm pretty sure these things are all, like, pretty hotly contested, no?
I mean, yeah, they're hotly contested, but I mean, I think they're fairly straightforward analyses.
There's no shot are these straightforward analyses that in another media environment or in another market environment where there are 3 other competitors, what hypothetical new innovations or products could exist? I mean, like, unless you're literally very clearly saying, like, this price is marked up too much, maybe, and then even that's going to be up for debate, right?
So for the little harm analysis, you literally say, all right, let's say that we have the meat packers, and we have all these meat packers colluding on price, and because they're colluding on price, we can show that the price is probably 5 to 15% higher than what it otherwise should be. Those analyses are pretty easy. You can't really go out and say, all right, well, if we had 3 competing firms instead of 1, what would actually be developed for the search engine? We don't, because we don't know what those firms would or would not do, and we also don't know what innovations are basically being done by that firm that would have been done that wouldn't be done by competing firms.
I don't understand whose point you're trying to prove, mine or yours?
Mine. Oh, dude. I'm sorry. I'm just really bad with these words. But all right. So, in
Like,
your
right now,
alternative
let's take grounded in one example right now.
Sure.
Is it possible? Like, how do we not know that there couldn't have been, like, way cooler or better search engines created?
We can't.
Okay, but, like, yeah, so, but the fact that there's, like, a 95% market share of, like, one search engine, doesn't that point to, like, a bad environment where, like, there doesn't need to be a cap, like, that much of a dominant?
I think that points to an environment where we have a very, very good search engine that other people have tried and failed to dethrone.
Who's trying to make a search engine right now? Like, if
China has. There was multiple competing ones at the beginning when Google launched. Google outcompeted them by a lot. DuckDuckGo, I think, is like a privacy-oriented one. There's, I think, Yandex overseas and Baidu overseas. And then I think Yahoo still has a search engine. I don't know how many people actually use that, but my assumption is that one's still pretty big.
Do you think that it's harder for these other search engines to compete because of all of the vertical and horizontal integration that Google has with their services? So for instance, I can sign on to my Google account across different devices, like cell phones that might be running a Google operating system, or like my email works better with a browser because I can sign into like my browser like exactly with one Google account across everything. Like, you don't think that makes it really hard for those other services to compete?
I don't think it makes it hard for the search engine to compete necessarily, no. For the entire suite of products that are integrated together, potentially. But I think it also provides a massive benefit to the consumer that they're able to have these free tools.
We're looping.
Yeah.
I'm not denying the benefit. I don't know why you keep talking about the
Sure,
benefit.
yeah,
I use these products.
I
I know there's a benefit, obviously. But like by acknowledging that benefit, I think we're literally saying that, like, yeah, like, I don't know if I would ever use like another competitor that was developed because of that benefit. That's like the issue.
Yeah, unless you had a product that was better, but you could still use the other portions of it, right? Even without bundling, you can still use like you can still use these other projects. If you use Gmail, you're not obligated to use Google as your search engine, right? You can still go to Yahoo, you can still go to these other places. You just go to Google because it's convenient and gives you everything that you need, and you're not really seeing any benefit other than the search results that come out, right?
Okay. Yeah. I just like I don't know even what I'm arguing against right now. The integration between all of these different products and services obviously makes it super hard for any other company to ever compete. Like, I don't know if I would ever use. I don't know personally if I would ever use like a non-fucking Google phone, just because of all of the integration that exists right now with my currently existing like stuff, like my phone, my browser, and everything else. And so like if somebody wants to compete to take that away from me, like damn, they're up against if you want to compete with me on a search browser to win me over as a customer, you're competing with phones You're competing with email. You're competing with my calendar. You're competing with so much shit. You're never gonna win. I'm never using your fucking product. Even if it's a better product, I'm not gonna use it. I think that's the issue. But it seems like you're like, oh well, that's good because it's like really
it sounds
cool.
like they've created a wonderful ecosystem that has everything.
Exactly.
That
So
you
you're doing the justify. Yeah.
Like I don't see how you're just saying, oh, potentially in the
not saying
future.
potentially. I'm giving you like a.
No, you're saying that they've created this big, beautiful ecosystem, and that if there is 3 competing companies, then one portion of that ecosystem might exist and be slightly better. But then I'm not going to have this big integrated ecosystem, or I'm going to have another ecosystem that's slightly better and integrated because.
Yeah, but when I'm arguing, first of all, you can create ecosystems within different companies. That's completely possible. APIs exist, number one, and number two. Yeah, I'm arguing that like I don't like the concept of an ecosystem because it's essentially like monopolistic in nature. That's what it sounds like to me. Because like were these ecosystems not existing, there would almost for sure be more competitors in these arenas.
I don't think there would be more competitors in the search arena. I don't think there would be more competitors in the advertising arena.
Okay.
Maybe in the other portions, like in email or stuff like that, in terms of the free consumer-facing products. But I think you would end up with the same situation where you would have competition in one area, and then someone would figure out how to integrate and do everything together. And then
that's what I'm saying is the integration should be like illegal. Fuck them.
Well, but Ragepope wouldn't it make sense that it would stymie competition if we have these incredibly vertically integrated companies that take over multiple markets? Like, for instance, if I wanted to make, let's say that every charging station for electric vehicles, was like a Tesla charging station, right? But let's say that I just wanted to make electric cars. Doesn't it necessarily reduce the chance that my innovative electric vehicle technology would get broadly adopted if nobody would be able to charge it on a broad, sort of generalized, available charging network?
Do you think that's like a issue where that's an antitrust thing, or do you think we should literally just do the same thing we've done, like the EU does cell phones, and say you must charge off of USB? Does that sound like a legislative issue?
But that's an antitrust regulation.
Most vertically integrated monopolies are actually great for consumers because it provides consistency in terms of products delivered. You can guarantee your the quality of your product across the entire lifetime. You can guarantee that you have the production that you need for everything all across the supply chain, that you're not going to be running into hiccups where you have to renegotiate contracts. You're going to have massive consumer welfare benefits for the most part, assuming that you're not exerting monopoly power of locking people out of, say, buying iron in a steel plant for your cars, and then locking people out of the ability to do that. But for the most part, integrating these vertical monopolies on average is good for the consumer until people start actually exercising welfare power. Market power.
But what you described is an antitrust regulation, right? It's like, hey, this vertical integration is bad, so we're going to force you into adopt a generalized, sort of more modular technology, right? Sort of like how like your homes.
That's not saying you're not allowed to have chargers and a car battery. You're not allowed to have chargers and make electric cars. They're saying that if you're going to do things, we're going to standardize this the same way that we standardize the oil blends and everything else across industries.
Well, but it sounds like the same thing, though.
No, it's not.
What's the difference? I'm asking the question.
Like,
what's the difference between like a regulating agency saying, hey, you're not allowed to make specialized chargers for your special EV, and a regulator saying, hey, you can make chargers, but they can't be specialized? I mean, these seem like the same functional thing.
No, you're saying that if you make EVs, then you can't make car chargers. That's literally what you're saying.
That's not what I'm saying. Because what you're saying, because using the EU, I mean, the EU regulation is a perfect example of the kind of thing that I think makes sense, right? Where, yeah, I mean, if Apple wants to make USB-Cs, I guess they can, right? But you cannot make a specialized, like, only Apple device technology that can charge phones, right? That's an example of tying that monopolies can take advantage of.
Technology to whatever technology exists as well. Because now Apple
real quick on the tech side, like how many people are like happy for like all of the competing standards? Like I feel like it's one of the biggest memes that we constantly complain about, like in the tech world, that there are like 52 different plugs and adapters and chargers, and like I'm pretty sure almost everybody ubiquitously enjoyed the USB-C form factor. Like it can be a little bit complicated to figure out what exactly is implied by the standard sometimes, but it's way better than having like 50 million different types of fucking plugs.
Sure, but now you're saying you can't innovate at all. If Apple wants to have,
no one is saying that. It's just a form factor.
Do you know what happened in the? You can't. If you're stuck with USB-C, you can't innovate on your connection lines.
That's not what the EU did do. The The EU didn't say you have like USB-C is the always and forever technology that you have to use for charging phones. They established, I think, a cooperative committee of looking at different ways to design chargers so that you don't fall behind innovatively, but also at the same time establishing a broad consumer standard that if you want to sell a device that charges phones, it has to be the same sort of unified standard that we agree on. I mean, it's a way to try and blend the utility of having a unified standard and also
Apple out of innovating on their chargers. Apple's just not going to have any chargers anymore. That's literally how it's going to go in the next generation.
Let's look at wait. Let's look at their proprietary, like Thunderbolt and shit. What were the innovations? What were the innovations? Like were there any Apple users? Well, sure. I mean,
yes,
like,
but yes, yeah.
Are there any people that are like, oh
too.
God, like they're using USB-C now? I can't take advantage of these proprietary Apple connectors. Like, is anybody thinking that?
Maybe not in terms of those direct terms, but sure, there's a lot of engineering features put into it that aren't in the USB-C, and that Apple thought was appropriate to provide to their consumers. Yes.
I disagree. I don't think there were any. I think it was a way to lock you into buying certain shit. But I could be wrong unless somebody can tell me something different. But like, for instance, if somebody's like, oh no, like Thunderbolt can do way higher data transfers or 7,000 watt charging that USB-C just can't handle.
You want to talk to an Apple engineer about why Thunderbolts are just way better than USB-C and how the standards are?
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
I get to bring Louis Rossman on though. Okay.
But with the EU's regulatory framework, again, like the Apple engineer can go to whatever the committee established for this is and make the case that, hey, the USB-C is an inferior technology for these reasons. You need to adapt it in this way to make it better, right? I mean, there's nothing stopping like Apple engineers from making that case.
I don't know. I don't think you should ever have to go to a regulatory commission to say that I've come up with something new and improved that I want to sell to my consumers, and now you're just not going to let me sell it to them.
Well, wait, but
that seems like
we do that with so many different regulations, though, right? So, like you have to prove that like your products are safe and that they're beneficial to the you can't just sell anything and just say it's innovative, right?
All right. So here's the difference. USB-C is a connector. The Thunderbolt's an electrical standard. Is basically what he said. So I assume it's for charging and for transferring energy along the wire. I assume that there's like a fundamental difference between the two technologies.
What do you mean fundamental difference? Like it's like a different, like it's like electricity 2.0, or I don't understand what you mean by that.
So I don't know what exactly it does. I'm listening or watching them type right now. But again, they're different standards. So USB-C is just a way to get devices to communicate with each other. Sometimes
no, hold on. Wait, real quick, hold on. USB-C is just a form factor. It's like a square. Like that's all USB-C is.
It's not just a form factor. It has to do with the electronic messages that get sent along and then the channel for electricity that goes through. I don't know. I'm not a double E.
Wait, hold on. Am I a more techie person to correct me? I'm almost positive USB-C is literally just a form factor. Like you can have anything, like it could be, I'm pretty sure you can have theoretically USB-C 2.0 or USB-C 3.0 or USB-C like different, you can have a USB-C cable that only does power transfer, or you can have a USB-C cable that does data transfer and maybe no power. It's just a form factor. There might be some like protocols or whatever that are more, but...
Well, wait, but like Ragepope, I think we're getting a little specific here, but like if we imagine, I think the electric cars is a good example, right? That if we imagine a scenario where the charging infrastructure is entirely Tesla dominated, that like to charge an electric vehicle is way more.
Can we just go to make regular cars?
I feel like this is
we have iron,
I think this is pretty simple, right? I mean, like I think the example makes a lot of sense, right? It's just a hypothetical that if we have charging infrastructure that's basically Tesla dominated, and that like it's 1,000 times more convenient to charge an electric car if you have a Tesla versus any other brand. Let's say that I have an innovative electric car technology, but I'm not allowed to use Tesla charging technology.
He's an AFK. Can you pull in Spinboy to argue about this? He's all the way down at the bottom.
It seems like you're really unwilling to answer that hypothetical. Like, doesn't it make it harder to enter
because you're just saying you're
the
not
electric vehicle market? Okay, but Rich, doesn't it make it if you have to have a fully vertically integrated company, right, in order to compete on one aspect of a technology that you feel like you have an innovation for, doesn't that raise the barrier to entry and make a less competitive environment?
Get a converter. All right, Spinboy, tell us about.
Okay, but you're saying, but that might not. You're saying you have to build extra technologies out if you want to innovate on a single point.
You have to build out chargers anyways, but now you're piggybacking off their infrastructure. They spent all this money building out their infrastructure, and now you're saying that you should just be able to use it for free and get all their investment.
No one is saying for free. We're just saying that by you saying they've invested in infrastructure, we agree, but they're investing in that infrastructure to protect their industry, which makes it not competitive.
Okay, Ragepope. Right. Ragepope, I have a question. Okay, if Shell had like proprietary gasoline and Shell had Shell cars that could only take Shell gasoline, and the same thing with Exxon, and the same thing with all these other oil and gas companies. Do you think that we would have like better gasoline that was more fuel efficient, or do you think you would just have a much less convenient consumer? You think we would innovate gasoline and make gasoline much more fuel efficient?
You can design engines
come
around
on.
specific fuel types and get way better performance. Yes.
I told you that this is what this combo would look like. Okay, fuck you.
I'm sorry, like
Okay,
that's great.
Spinboy.
Okay.
What do you mean?
So I'm not necessarily here to argue anything. I'm just gonna explain the technical differences as to the technology being talked about. So USB-C is just a connector. It's a mechanical standard. There is a standard within it for what type of signaling you can put over it, essentially outlining what the differential pairs, the signal, the physical pieces of copper can have in terms of ones and zeros flying through it. And that encompasses Thunderbolt, USB 3, all of that stuff. Essentially everything to get it backwards compatible, and then also do all of the high-speed protocols. So, and then the power stuff is called PD. It's power delivery. It's just a sideband, slower speed connection that is just another standard for specifically talking about, hey, I want to do this much power, and then both sides negotiate and agree and to send that much power. Essentially,
well, I think it's obvious that like
stuff.
It's fair to say Apple and USB, like whatever the Apple chargers versus USB-C is different, right? I think that, but that's not. I think the argument is less so like, are these things different? I think that the argument is more so,
is it worth it?
Is there a utility to the consumer? Does it create a more competitive atmosphere for creating and innovating on phone technology to not tie the charging port to specific chargers and rather to have a more modular technology? And or does it hurt the quality of Apple iPhones to such a great degree that creates a negative, consumer experience?
Like, has there ever been a time where like
seem...
a consumer is using a phone and they're just like, fuck, if only this used a Thunderbolt connector instead of like USB-C, it would be so much better.
Well, that's the problem. It's not. Well, okay. Thunderbolt's a electrical standard. USB-C is a connector. So if we're talking about just connectors,
well, the Thunderbolt is an Apple. That's an
is-
Apple standard, right?
It is an Intel standard.
Oh, Intel. Gotcha. Sorry, my bad. What are the Apple cables called? Are they called Lightning, or what the fuck?
Lightning. There's Lightning cables, which is what the little slim, the reversible cable that they had since the iPhone 5 or whatever.
Sure.
And then there's the Thunderbolt connector that they put on their MacBooks, but that's not actually a Thunderbolt connector. It's Thunderbolt electrical spec and the mini display port connector, which is a standard that anyone could put on. The only thing here that is really locked is the Lightning connector that they put on all of their portable things. That's an Apple only thing, and that's because they had Apple mechanical engineers design that connector. It was, at the time, consider the history, at the time, what was the connectors of choice for mobile devices? You either had some third-party piece of shit connector that didn't have USB at USB high speeds, or it charged at some weird voltage, whatever. So Apple designed this reversible connector that had all the port flipping in it and everything, and it was super innovative at the time. And that's kind of why, other than the fact that everyone bought iPhones, that's kind of why it had such good lasting powers, because it was, at the time, if we consider 2007, that you had fucking mini display, or mini USB and micro USB, which are trash, so it was innovative at the time. USB-C is obviously another step on top of that. A bunch of innovations were taken in. It's reversible, it's small, it's slim. In my opinion, I think there's some mechanical issues with it that are not super good, but that's just meme engineering opinion. But it encompasses everything that currently exists for essentially all connectors, standardized. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing. However, from my understanding of the European legislation stuff, they're kind of forcing everyone has to have USB-C, which is fine in the case of if you assume that USB-C is like the end-all be-all where it does everything and you can just continue to add new functionality on top forever, it's okay, except for unless you run into a case where it's not good enough anymore, right? And then it's like, okay, well, how do you make a new connector and allow it to transfer at faster speeds? It needs more differential pairs, whatever. Physically, new connector. And how do you innovate in there when essentially all of the EU is saying like, hey, you can't make a new connector. You have to use this now standard connector. So I think that's the main thing, but I'm not really gonna argue one way or the other. USB-C is fine.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, it's.
I think it's
it doesn't
okay
sound
that like for new standards that there could be like arguments made, I guess, in front of committees or whatever for it. But
yeah. So the thing is that, well, okay, I'm not 100% sure what the committee thing is. There's some nuance here because there's really two things that, and I know Destiny, you get this shit mixed up all the time every so often when you're talking about USB-C. There is the mechanical standard, which is the connector itself.
Form factor, yeah.
And yes, the form factor, the amount of differential pairs in it, it's all, there's a document with the mechanical standard. It has to be exactly that way so that all the cables and everything can connect to it. Then there's the electrical standards, which is a lot easier to change because there's already just a fuckload of shit in USB-C. You have Thunderbolt, you have USB 4, which is just standardized Thunderbolt. Intel essentially released the standard for high-speed 20 gig differential pairs and that they use, and now USB.
Okay, you get to the point. Yeah. You don't have to specify every single part of the USB. Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
I mean, I'm just saying there's like 15 different electrical standards that they can pump over USB-C.
Yes.
And you can add more electrical standards in the future as long as
it
you're
fits
not,
the form factor, right? And the specifications of whatever the form factor entails. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but that's not, you're making it sound like it's like an easy thing to do. It's not necessarily easy when you do that.
I never said it's an easy thing to do, but I'm saying it's probably a preferential environment to like people having 15 different types of cords to charge all their shit, right? I would say that in general, like what does the U in USB stand for? Universal, right? Yeah, we want to be able to use like USB cables to charge all of our shit. I think that's a massive boon to consumers, but left to free market devices, that would never happen. I would have Sony cables for my Sony products. I would have like the old cell phones back in the day used to have like all sorts of different charging fucking things. It was so annoying.
Yeah, you're right, but everyone kind of moved to USB-C anyway, without the European thing just happening. Right?
I feel like Apple was kind of pushed in that direction, no?
They were pushed in that direction, I suspect. But that's because they, one, had the iPhone obviously is like a big ship to turn, right? It's massive, and it's so that makes it difficult. But two, the connector is already like, it kind of checks all the boxes that you need for a mobile device, right?
Sure.
So I guess you could argue that there's like two competing form factors at that point, USB-C and Lightning, but it's not like a bunch of countries had to regulate people to go to USB-C. It was just clearly better than the alternatives. Which
wait, but that's exactly what happened. A bunch of countries did do it. The European Union came together did it. If that wouldn't have happened, do you think that Apple would have adopted the USB-C form factor?
I mean, they do use USB-C on all their portables, all their Macs.
But do you think that the iPhone would have switched from the whatever fuck that weird cable is to the USB-C cable?
I don't know.
Apple, but here's another problem. Even if it was better for the consumer to do it, doesn't the vertical monopoly that they have on like a lot of their fucking products, like the fact that they're selling those Apple cables, maybe hurt their push to doing that? Like why would I make my phone have a USB-C cable when my current cable does everything and I sell that current cable?
Because I don't think Apple as a company makes that much money off of cables compared to like the rest of the stuff they make. I don't think this is a thing that they necessarily care about, but like, I don't know. It's just me from.
I mean, they clearly care about it because they fought for like the last 5 years to prevent the EU from doing this, and like obviously it's a pretty big part of their business fight. I guess. Right? I don't see why they lobby so hard.
You're saying they fought, but you don't know why they fought for this, right?
I mean, what would
like the easy answer is they're fighting because they make a bunch of money off of cables.
Well, no, the true answer is probably that, like, if you maintain proprietary control over your form factors and the specs of the cable, you can probably custom design your cables to tailor meet the needs of your phone, right? Whereas USB-C is necessarily going to have a little bit of extra baggage because, like we said, it's a form factor that can probably carry a ton of different. I mean, like, there's always going to be a benefit to having proprietary specs for all of your shit. I'm not going to deny that, but I think ultimately it's anti-consumer a bit. Like,
it could be. I mean, I think in general. This is coming from just purely from just engineering background, electrical design, stuff like that. I can see there is a lot of good, essentially the same bullshit arguments that were happening earlier. Not necessarily bullshit, but like the same thing that was being said in terms of like, okay, if you have like a monopoly on a thing. There is some good that can be done. It's kind of different because you don't necessarily have a monopoly, but if you aren't forced into USB-C, yes, you can do special engineering things that other people can't necessarily do, and that's like direct innovation. So it's hard for me in my mindset to really square that circle in terms of... Well,
I think it's easy. I think it's super easy to square the circle. I think the question is there something innovative that could be done on the Lightning form factor that USB-C isn't doing? Because let's say it was the case, like, okay, well, the iPhone 17 is coming out, but we had to axe fast transfer, we had to axe fast charging, we had to get rid of these features because it's like, oh, well, fuck, this actually sucks. But I'm pretty sure that USB-C micro... I think it's micro USB-C. I'm pretty sure outperforms Lightning now. Like all of like the different things you can load on that cable are better than Lightning now, right?
Correct. But the issue is that now any company's kind of stopped from not using USB-C to improve on that, unless there's some we mentioned, some sort of consortium that whatever the process is for like updating that so that you can now sell that connector in the EU.
Yeah, I think the goal would be there just needs to be a committee that says like, sorry, and then you can go. You should just have to show a committee like, here's the innovations that we could make on a new cable. This is what we want to do, and then you'd have to go.
So I think that's good, and I agree. I think the problem is that getting the correctly tech literate people on the committee to agree to the innovations is difficult, and I think that's kind of the scary bit, quote unquote, is that how do you get like a committee of people to agree that something that this company wants to do is innovative and that they should bend the will of this consumer protection for it?
I mean, it could arguably be more like you could argue that it might slow down more marginal changes in advancement in the technology. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, but I find it hard to believe that even if you, like, let's say that you created a charger that could charge devices in, let's say 10% of the time, right? That's literally 10 times better than the current technology that we have. Like, let's say you created that technology. I feel like it would be difficult. And let's say that the technology was also scalable and economic and it was cheap and affordable and stuff like that. And it wasn't terrible for the environment or whatever it is. I find it hard to believe that you could present that technology to a committee of like, politically appointed people, and they would be like, you know what? I just don't understand why the fuck we would want to do this, right? Now, I would agree maybe that if the technology is like, hey, we've demonstrated through one of our studies that you can increase the efficiency of charging by, 0.5%, and it costs 0.1% more, something like that. Like, I can see where that hurdle could be harder in a committee like this, because you are talking about standardizing a technology for like hundreds of millions of person market in the EU. But big innovation, I just don't think, it doesn't seem like big innovations are really stymied by sort of consumer standardization.
The issue is that you're talking big innovations. The reality is that a lot of these innovations are incredibly incremental at this point. So what do you do? You wait for essentially what would end up happening in my mind is the only way some big change would happen is some big company would have to secretly put together like years and years worth of updates into some new innovation without if they want to keep that like all trade secret, and which they're completely allowed to do all that, and they want to capitalize on all this engineering investment they're putting in. That's like it's necessarily slowing the boat down, which I don't know if I guess the balance there is slowing the boat down versus some level of consumer protection, whether or not that, and then the argument from me would be, are we really getting that significant amount of consumer protection through USB-C and forcing USB-C when when the reality is that the market has already kind of pushed everyone to use USB-C because it's better, other than Apple, because they had one competing thing.
Well, it's not just like the basic immediate consumer protection and convenience of having a universal charger that you can use for, not literally all your devices, but most of your devices, let's say.
Yes.
But it's the convenience of, or not that just that convenience, but it's also the potentially anti-competitive nature of being able to tie one product to a fundamentally different product. And it's hard to test the counterfactual, but the actual sort of economic innovation argument could go the other way and say, hey, now that a phone company doesn't have to compete with one company that has proprietary chargers that artificially increases the switching cost of consumers and makes it necessarily harder for a consumer to substitute one phone for another, do we get better phones as a result of this standardization of technology at the end of the day? It's the same thing when people make the argument about how like the Apple Store is proprietary. Like you can't get Apple apps on like Androids, right? Does that increase the switching cost of consumers, and does that make it harder for more innovative phones to really take the market because there's not this incredible amount of standardization or vertical integration? I try to avoid using that word, but there's not this incredible amount of vertical integration that makes it so consumers either directly or softly, implicitly or explicitly, have a harder time switching between one technology or another. Like the harder it is for a customer to switch from one product to a competing product, that's necessarily creating a less innovative and competitive market.
When it's done for a reason that's not related to that product, right? Like you want people to pick the best electrical car, not necessarily somebody to pick the car that has like the best charging network, right?
Yeah.
Because then what might happen is people will pick worse products because of other products that are like vertically integrated with it, which is, I think, unfortunate.
Right. So that's all. I think it's worth pointing out that it's fair to say, hey, theoretically, it could be the case that we have a depressed sort of technological advancement curve of chargers because of this change. But I think you could just as easily theoretically say, well, because of the tying of this technology to Apple's products, we're having less innovations in the phone industry because of this, right? So we just have to see how it works out. But my guess would be that the history of corporations getting broken up or getting regulated in this way or whatever, it just seems like the history of that is not that we incredibly suffer in terms of innovation. It seems like it just ends up that the consumer has a better environment and a little bit more convenience of using products. But I mean, this could be an exception, but I don't know. The history doesn't seem to be on the side of corporations in that regard.
Yeah, totally understand. Like I said, I'm just coming from the purely like spurgy engineering perspective of like, okay, now a company couldn't make a new connector. And that's the only thing that I think maybe just keep in mind. You guys probably don't give a shit, but yeah, just
fuck them.
I don't.
Perspective.
We should we should nationalize all the cable industries.
All the tech companies,
Yeah. Just put bureaucrats in charge of them.
Because that works so well with Congress now.
Ooh.
It does.
Well, so one thing I wanted to just pop in and mention is I guess everybody's point about antitrust is the idea of there are exceptions in antitrust law for things that are like consumer beneficial. You often see this sometimes with mergers and acquisitions where people will come in and make a good argument for why it actually benefits the consumer and increases the benefits to the customer. And those can be reasons that will allow those mergers to go through.
Yeah.
In addition,
no, I mean that's like I was saying a day or two ago with Destiny, that it's not enough for a company just to be a monopoly or to have monopoly power to get broken up or to get regulated in this way. You have to prove that they're taking advantage, is my understanding. You have to prove that they're taking advantage of their monopoly power in a way that's negative to the competitive environment or consumers or innovation or something along those lines.
Or that's a abusing their intellectual property, as sometimes can happen when it comes to patents and trademarks and copyrights. Usually with patents is the concern. But one of the other things I think that is overlooked a little bit, it has been talked about here, which is the notion of reusability of things and planned obsolescence. It makes it more difficult to get on board with stuff and adopting new technology if there is a very low time period in which it's going to become obsolescent. One of the things in terms of standardization, even though it may be sacrificing incremental changes, means that we get to play in the longer term the benefit of that sort of non-planned obsolescence. We can enjoy things. Right to repair becomes more important, but it also becomes more of a standard that we should adopt, and it helps the environment too because it eliminates a lot of waste.
Is there any Is there any planned obsolescence that you can point to right now in like the tech industry, in electronics or whatever?
I don't really believe in that as a concept. That's his argument. Just as a heads up.
Some of the stuff with regards to the change in form factors, particularly with microchips, has been an issue as of late. One of the things I do applaud AMD, for instance, for doing was the backwards compatibility between, say, the X3000 series and the X5000 series, which was super helpful for me and my wife when we were building computers, that we didn't really have to go out and buy a whole bunch of new stuff. We could just upgrade a processor and still get the full value of that particular processor without the e-waste of then having to get rid of things like motherboard, memory, and all that.
So planned obsolescence necessarily implies that there's not necessarily malice, but there's like a market play happening where this company thinks that, hey, we're going to change this fundamentally and force people to rebuy things. Do you think that
I know that exists? I can't explain as to how I know that those things exist. I can just tell you that I know these things exist.
Okay, so it's not, you don't actually know. You just are potentially illiterate and just don't understand what's going on.
So a little bit background on me, buddy. I'm an antitrust attorney, and I do
Okay, so
defense.
you have some recent examples then.
I think what he's alluding to is that he has like insider knowledge about certain cases that might dox him or might,
or that might involve violating client confidentialities that are not allowed to be, or trade secrets that are not allowed to be made public. Yeah. But oftentimes what my work involves is helping to get merger acquisition approval from the government. So when you have two companies that go through the merger acquisitions, they usually have to go through the FTC and the DOJ to get those approvals. That's part of the types of cases I work on.
There you go. I mean, you should have jumped in earlier. I'd have loved to have heard your perspective with Ragepope in the call.
I think Destiny hit it on the head, and I agree with Destiny in regards to that.
Yeah,
so
I'm right about everything.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that when you have these vertical and horizontal integrations, they do increase the costs of barrier to entry, which makes it more difficult for those businesses to compete. But it also weakens the resolve of people to make switches, because if they're switching, and Google's a great example, when you're sitting there saying, okay, well, I'm going to have my entire platform be Google-oriented, but for this one thing, I'm going to have to make a conscious decision to move away from the Google platform, not to mention the amount of information that they can hoard, even absent that search history, that they can then monopolize in terms of financial access. Because that's part of what makes Google so powerful, is that the content aggregation from all of their services then becomes a data broker that they can then be a singular, pass-through for.
Yeah. Ooh. I mean, I don't know. I hate to appeal to just the basic economics, but I mean, as far as I'm aware, that's exactly right. That obviously, free entry and exit, basic component of perfect competition, perfectly competitive market. And when you have a circumstance where your entry to a market is contingent upon building multiple different innovative technologies that compound into an entire sort of environment of use instead of just a singular technology with modular components, I mean, of course, that is going to decrease the competitive nature of that market. And I mean, phones are an example. We were talking about electric cars earlier, where if you got proprietary chargers, I mean, stuff like that. Like, I just, I don't know. It doesn't. It just seems obvious to me that it would be bad to have incredible sort of monopolistic, oligopolistic power combined with vertical integration and technology. You'd end up with these types of problems potentially.
Seems like the best solution is, like folks were memeing about, was socialized tech. Kind of get like all the best people to work for some socialized government section that essentially puts together these standards and enforces them.
No, fuck it. The best decision is just make so businesses can't buy other businesses that aren't directly like their business. Fuck that. You can't do it. No more acquisitions of big companies. You shouldn't be able to buy and have all those other fucking things. You should just be able to do one business. That's your business, and you don't get to do anything else peripheral of it. Fuck that.
Well, the great problem nowadays isn't so much vertical or horizontal integration, but it's integration of patents and intellectual property. So you'll have a startup that comes up with a really good idea, and before it gets to the point where it could even become a matter of competition, they just buy up.
Yeah. But that goes into my exactly what I'm saying in terms of companies being able to buy shit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I think fundamentally, I think there is a shift in attitude, and I think as a capitalist, I don't think it's a good one, that if you go to Silicon Valley, your goal isn't to put Amazon or Google out of business. Your goal is for them to buy your business. I think that's cancer.
Nah, that's
I'm not even saying
get my bag and retire, brother. Let's fucking go.
So one of the great examples was the Fox Disney merger and the way that worked out. That wasn't necessarily a buying of a business. That was just a purchase of intellectual property. And so where you could have a situation where you have just a sale of intellectual property, that in of itself may not necessarily trigger antitrust, but it's still an antitrust issue that kind of the law doesn't recognize the same way that it would be through a traditional business purchase.
Well, what do you think of IP rights in general? I've heard some people say that like we shouldn't have patents or IP at all.
Yeah,
right?
we call
should
those
just
people.
have, like, Harburger
those
taxes.
are pedophiles. Okay. Because literally the only people that argue that are fucking libertarians. Okay, fuck them.
Yeah,
I've heard
IP rights
socialists
general are fine. My biggest problem isn't necessarily with the IP rights. My biggest problem are with two factors. One is the length of copyright. Right.
Yes.
And the exceedingly long extensions that have been given to it. It shouldn't be the life of the author plus 70 years and 100 years for like corporations. It's insanity.
Yeah. But that's all that's like entertainment stuff. I was thinking more like medical patents and stuff like that.
That's the other half that I have a problem with, which is the patent system in it itself isn't a problem. The problem is that again, going to these incremental issues that we've talked about time and time again about innovations, they need to be patented as if they're like brand new patents. And a great example sometimes is the drug industry, where they'll take two existing stuff, modify the chemical compounds or the delivery system, and then patent it like it's a brand new drug. But changing a pill to an aerosol or an inhaler, is that really like? Patents are supposed to be non-obvious, and to me that seems like an obvious, methodology of innovation that shouldn't be considered a patent. And
right. Yeah. I mean, this is where, I think, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I think that's where maybe having like more government oversight and negotiation of things, like that's where, if we had a more robust universal healthcare system, you could have like the universal Medicare system come in and say, well, we're not going to pay for this because it's obviously not a meaningful patent that you're trying to propose to our Medicare system, right? We'd rather just take the old technology that's like 90% cheaper, so stuff like that doesn't really filter through to the consumer.
Well, there becomes an issue with that where it becomes like, okay, well, for instance, what do you do? So one of the big ones is Hatch-Waxman, which happens to deal with how generics hit the market. And sometimes the way that Hatch-Waxman works is, for instance, there is a grace period in which the first to file and the first to get approved gets a monopoly essentially on generics for a little bit. And before the wider market can start producing it, and it's to incentivize, obviously, the push to make a generic in the first place. But, if the industry goes and gets involved in things like horse trading and stuff like that, to be like, oh, well, I'll trade you your generic for the, monopoly on your generic, then it becomes much the same issue. Patents are an issue mostly in terms of how patents are prosecuted, how expensive it is for patents to be challenged and what have you, as well as patent trolls. There's a reason why the Eastern District of Texas is the one that everybody goes to for the patent stuff, because that's kind of become the mainstay.
I've heard that. And there's like one judge that's just a complete fucking shill for the the patent industry.
Even the towns down there. Like, I remember in law school we were watching something where apparently Samsung had built an ice rink in Texas because they thought that was a good idea. Purely like symbolic things that they have done to endear themselves to the goodwill of the people, so that when jury selection time comes for a patent case, they look good. That sort of strategic movement that goes on. The concept of patents and the length of patents for 20 years, and even extending medical patents where there's a valid medical patent, like the COVID vaccine and stuff like that. Something novel and new to account for testing.
Novel and new, you mean experimental, right?
Well,
on children.
Got him.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't call it the COVID vaccine. I should call it the Joe Biden mind control.
I'm just kidding. Actually, I don't know what I'm gonna get hit for on YouTube. Just kidding.
Yeah. Shit. I forgot about that. We're on YouTube now. Anyways, but accounting for the time period extensions with regards to testing and approval, that is also okay too. But just taking two existing drugs, smacking them together, and changing the format from pills to whatever, and then saying this new thing needs to get a whole new 20-year patent is ridiculous. So their patent abuses need to be addressed in kind.
Okay, what if, Batman, what about this? I heard about this as a solution, not sure how I feel about it. What if you did a progressive harbinger tax and system on medical patents? What are your thoughts?
Is that where, like, if you continue, the sooner you give it to the U.S. government or you give it to open source, the bigger the tax break?
No, so harbinger tax is the concept. I think it comes. I read that it came from like the Dutch, mercantile economy or something. Basically, the thought was that when you bring a ship to port, you have to declare the value of the items in your ship. And the value, you're either going to be taxed a percentage on the value, or the government is allowed to buy your ship. And the idea is that you have to assess a necessarily fair value, because you either have to be happy paying the tax on it, or you have to be happy with the government buying it, right? And so if you did a similar thing with patents, the idea would be that, okay, you want to patent this, fine, tell us what the value of this patent is, and if it's too low, the government can buy it. If it's too high, well, you're going to pay the tax rate on it.
So that kind of goes into what I had just said, because that's the policy equivalent of what I've heard, which is that when you come up with a new medical patent like this, if you're willing to put it out into open territory, in other words, if you're willing to give up the patent and the exclusivity, the sooner that you give up that exclusivity, the more of a tax break you would get in terms of the company's profits. So it would be an incentivization, almost like sort of the tax breaks we give for orphan drug development, if you're familiar with that. And for those who don't know, orphan drug development is development of drugs and treatments for diseases that are particularly rare, or
ones that you wouldn't make money developing drugs for anyway.
Ones that happen in low numbers, and so we give a bunch of tax breaks and financial incentives and grants and stuff like that to incentivize companies to produce those types of drugs. And so born from that was this idea of like, okay, the sooner you give up the patent for and you put it out into open source or generics market, we're willing to give you more breaks on your income.
But I do like the idea of like, say a drug is, I don't know, let's say it's the cure for cancer, like a drug that would help millions and millions of people, like a broadly used drug. I do kind of like the idea of having some sort of forced sale mechanism. right? That you can apply.
So there is something like that, but it's usually used for national security stuff. Like
Okay.
when there's research for like stealth technology and stuff like that, they'll force it, but it's very rare and it's usually only used for defense purposes.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I guess it's not that it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think that kind of thing is used currently in any sort of drugs or medical market that I'm aware of. But I do like the idea of having some sort of for sale mechanism for what we could deem as very, broadly beneficial drugs and services. Obviously, you're paying whatever the market rate of this drug is. You don't want to just steal IP from the government perspective, because then innovation gets hurt. But the government having the ability to take over patents, open it up, force it into the generic environment, in the case that it's something incredibly useful, like a cure for cancer or some innovative heart disease treatment or something. I don't know.
I don't think I've been convinced enough about like stuff related to medical patents. There might be good arguments there, but all of the ones I hear are dog shit for like how people approach this. So for instance, like people will talk about insulin is the big one that they talk about over and over again, that patent was opened 7,000 years ago, ignoring the fact that like old insulin isn't even remotely comparable to the synthetics created today. Another thing too is like I hear this argument over and over again that most scientific research is publicly funded, which is not true when it comes to bringing a drug to market. That's just general research. I feel like I guess I need to look at this in terms of like innovation in U.S. pharmaceutical markets. I feel like it's pretty high. I feel like that's pretty good. We probably like that. I feel like it should just be more protecting like consumers. So like more subsidization of like actual people purchasing medical treatment.
So yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with private medical research. It's more so just the potential failure of the market where you've got these certain people. Like for instance, when people came out with the vaccine or it wasn't a vaccine, but it was several years ago, and it was labeled as like the cure for hepatitis C, right? And the big headline wasn't that we cured hepatitis C. The big headline was that it's $1,000 a pill, right? And my thought is not that it's bad for a company to want to recoup a huge amount of R&D cost to develop a cure for hepatitis C. It's just that I think that there's probably more utility for the consumer and for the people who obviously have hepatitis C who might get it in the future, for the government to just buy out that patent at a fair market rate and then allow either a state production of that drug or just leasing it out to multiple different private actors to get that drug, at an affordable cost to people that need it.
Do we have the infrastructure for that publicly?
Well, the biggest problem is we do already have the legal infrastructure with eminent domain.
No, not legal infrastructure. I'm saying actual like manufacturing infrastructure.
No, that's not. It doesn't have to be the state, man. It could be, right? If you had like a state pharmaceutical drug company, but you could also just lease it out. You could buy that technology and like royalty it out to other companies that manufacture it, right?
One of the things that I got to give credit where credit is due, because Shkreli actually came up with this argument or with this idea first with relation to the infrastructure. Yeah, which is, I always pronounce his name poorly. But the idea was that we should have, particularly, I think he was saying the FDA. I think it should be the DoD, but having them produce generic drugs and sell essentially to the other government agencies and the DoD generic drugs. And much like the patent office is a huge moneymaker in terms of all the fees and filing costs that are associated with that, you could have the FDA making a bit ton of money that way.
You could do like a managed buyout of like a big pharmaceutical company, right? And then just put that, not run it like the USPS, but essentially just have the government own the equity of some company. And then now this company's purpose is to make generic drugs. I mean, there's generic manufacturing companies, right? So it doesn't seem unreasonable that the government could just buy out a conglomerate of those companies.
Econoboi, real quick, is there what your mic is like staticky? I don't know why. If there's like a loose connection or.
Oh, okay. Let me try and wiggle some stuff around.
So, my biggest issue, from that standpoint, I think the biggest issue is the idea of buying out a publicly traded company, but more towards Econboi's earlier point about buying out simply patents through some sort of eminent domain. the fact that we're talking about publicly just traded companies where there's an expectation on a return on revenue or a return on investment means you couldn't just sell it to them at a break-even cost. You'd have to buy it at an absurdly inflated cost because the would be the expectation from the investors. And
Yeah, but that's
so.
true of eminent domain as well, right? Like, aren't people overcompensated sometimes if the government is coming in to buy?
To a degree, but it's lesser to a degree because there isn't the second-party investment that is of concern, right? So let's say the government's building a road and they want to take your house. They're going to pay you fair market value for the house. Oftentimes, actually, it's below market value slightly because, it's a forced sale versus, a competitive market. But to that end, you're paying directly the house owner, right? You're not, say, paying there's no secondary party that needs to be of the government's concern, the same way that there would be with stockholders, right? And so then you would have all sorts of shareholders up in arms saying, my property rights or my fundamental due process rights are being violated because, I invested in this company with an expectation of a return on investment. This is actually valued at this much money. We should be earning this over the years, and it should be this amount plus dividends plus the increase in stock and the rolling costs.
But that's the case with literally any M&A transaction, right? That some shareholders might not think it's a great deal, but it's a sort of democratic shareholder determination, right? It's like when Elon Musk bought Tesla. The board had to vote on behalf of the shareholders to agree to that sale. And I'm sure some shareholders were like, this is bullshit, I don't want to do this. But, well, that's the board you elected, right? So.
But the amount that is required is usually like 2/3 or some super majority. The problem then becomes a matter of, first of all, technically anybody, even the minority, can sue in those instances, and they have, just because of the fact that they think that you have activist investors, you have all these other people who are interested for other reasons, and you're kind of seeing it now because people have asked me to talk about the Blizzard Activision thing, and you're seeing even non-party competitors potentially being upset by this because they could say later on down the line, we were planning to make a generic of this. We didn't have the money or the ability to, or bandwidth to invest in a full R&D structure here, but, we were willing to wait the 20 years and then, go ahead and take our shot at a generic. And therefore, now we've lost income too. So it would completely disrupt the market where...
Well, but they could still make generics, right? They would just be competing. They wouldn't be like the only generic that was made, correct?
They'd be competing
that's the point
at
of
somebody
generics.
who only has to make it at cost. That's the problem. The government's only requirement under those circumstances would be to make it at cost in terms of the taxpayer money, and even in some cases, it wouldn't even have to be at cost, depending on the nature of the medicine and how Congress sets things up, right?
I guess, I guess I just don't see the big issue with it. I don't see. I mean, I see what you're saying, that there's some transition costs associated with the initial acquisition of this sort of productive capacity for generics, but I'm not sure if I don't think there's a lot of long-term issues with the government playing a role in providing low-cost drugs to people. I mean, you can make the same argument about providing low-cost insurance. Like, but the government, by providing a public option to everyone, is forcing insurance companies to compete with essentially a non-profit with a much bigger market share. But in the examples where governments do that, it seems like the result is just basically more affordable insurance and care for people. It doesn't seem to, it doesn't seem to completely get rid of any private.
That's probably a case where the market is probably not setting the price as efficiently as it could, right? Like, isn't that arguably the reason why minimum wage, at least small increase in minimum wage, don't seem to hurt any competitive shit for the market, is because it's probably not being set as high as it could be, right?
Well, that's kind of my argument with drugs, though. It seems like almost structurally, like a patent itself is a temporary monopoly granted, which allows that producer of that drug to extract economic rents from that product, right? It's almost necessarily not a market clearing price that's being granted to that producer.
But some of that is, one, the recognition of the value of innovation, but also, two, a lot of that is recovery of the costs associated with testing and development, such that by the time it does cycle through the full 20-year cycle for the patent, presumably, they are making money, But then again, once the generic, and we've seen this, and this is to your point, which is once the generics enter the market, the price drops substantially.
Yeah, and also you have to recover the R&D for products that don't work out as well.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
No, and
then you have to
totally
cover it in a way to reinvest it too.
That's totally reasonable, right? That's why I don't think I would be in favor of like the government just taking over shit, right? I think that just having a managed buyout and a system where you can offer, reasonable market value for products. That's why the Harburger tax to me might make sense in this case. There's some I've heard that there are some structural limitations to a tax like that, but I think with patents it could make unique sense to structure that way, because you're accounting in that case for either the rent associated with that patent in the case that they keep the patent but pay the tax on it, or you're buying out the patent at a rate that the company agrees is a fair rate for that patent to be bought out at, right? And obviously the revenue from, if they keep the patent and take it, you could just funnel that into, I don't know, your generics companies, or I don't know, some subsidies for people to buy the drug or something like that. But it seems like that structure is just would end up being better for the consumer, because I'm sympathetic to the thought of like, well, these companies do need to make back the money on their investment to some degree, obviously, because then they wouldn't invest in the long term in these types of technologies, which is fair enough.
Yeah, and to your point, that's fine in a vacuum. The problem is, you're assuming that they're going to always come to an agreement on a number. And so what happens in a situation where the government and the pharmaceutical company do not come to an agreement? Does the government still have the right to force the sale at eminent domain levels in terms of their pricing scheme? Or is it just like a fair, competitive marketplace where it's like, okay, you made an offer, we were refused, we're going to continue onward as we go. Thank you very much for your time, and we're just.
But in this case, there's no negotiation in the case that I'm describing, right? The company just says the patent is worth this. The patent is worth $1.3 billion, right? And the government says, hey, you know what? That's a reasonable price. We're going to buy it for $1.3 billion. The company has said this is what we need in order to sell this patent to the government, and so that's what you get. Now, in the case
I understand what you're saying. However,
never a forced sale. Yeah.
Okay, so the problem becomes one of where those numbers are off and they differ greatly, right? So if you sit there and say, for your example, it's worth 1.1 billion, and the government says actually it's only worth 800 million, or it's only worth 750. Obviously there's a huge gap there. How do you meet the difference, and what happens if there's a gap?
If the government said, like, I get what you're saying. If the company says it's worth 1.3 billion and the government says actually I think it's worth 800 million, well, that would just be the government agreeing, okay, you think this is more valuable than we think, so you're just going to pay the 10% like royalty tax on selling this drug, and then we can use that money for some, I don't know, collective purpose. I mean, I think subsidies for the people buying it would make sense, but you could use it for anything, right? So I mean, if there's a disagreement on price, that's just where you'd end up paying the tax, or the government would end up buying it. If there's like perfect agreement, you'd be indifferent between the two options, but one of the two options would get picked by the government.
So are you proposing a separate type of taxation on top of already the corporate taxation scheme that exists for medical companies?
Yeah, that's part of the nuance of this proposal. Like, if you wanted to say that, these companies, I don't know, if you have a patent on this drug, for every dollar you pay in royalty, if you keep the technology, that's $1 less you pay in corporate tax. I mean, something like that could probably make sense. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the corporate tax anyway, so, that wouldn't seem unreasonable to me.
Well, I'm just happy for corporate taxes because it's double taxation. I want to tax not the corporation, but the people making money off of it too. But okay, then that could be something to be done, which is why I suggested, the one policy point that I had heard talked about, which is the tax break system, which it sounds like we're kind of on the same page on that one. It's just the way in which you do it, whether or not you're paying.
It's just yours doesn't have a sale mechanism, right? That's the thing that I think could be valuable, is making these companies establish a fair value for their patent, and then if the government decides, that actually is a fair value, then it goes generic and it goes into, open market production, or you produce it with open market in some, government manufacturing company or whatever it is. I think that's where it could be valuable. I think that there's also I think we would all three of us would probably agree that there are also probably some circumstances where, like, the government would, if we imagine a cure for cancer or like a cure for aging or something, it's like, okay, well, this technology just is so crazily important that it's widely and universally available at affordable rate that the government would force a sale. But that's an incredibly special circumstance, I think, where that would be the case.
I almost kind of thought that they were going to do it for the COVID vaccine.
Sure.
Where they were going to do something similar, where they were just going to be like, we're going to give you X amount of dollars under the
Didn't they kind of already do that? Like, we basically made pre-agreements to buy it, like, at a certain
yeah,
cost. Like,
I think that's I think that's why that worked, is because, and that's more towards the difference between my view and Econboi's view, which is that, in my view, making it optional avoids a lot of potential litigation, because if we had sort of forced that, I feel like there would have been a tremendous amount of litigation over it, which would have held up its production and distribution. Where if you do have this sort of important situation where you find a like truly groundbreaking treatment or drug, you want to get that out as fast as possible, and you can worry about the financial consequences later, rather than having the government come in and be more forceful about it, where it's going to, one, create a lot of spite, or even deter companies from engaging in that sort of research, knowing that it's going to be so wildly, sought after that it might invoke this type of response, versus doing it optionally and then dealing with the finances on the back end.
Yeah. I think the case where the government would truly very explicitly force a sale are very few and far between, to the extent that I don't even think the incentives would necessarily be relevant. Like, if we're for instance, if we're talking about a drug that cures aging, right? I mean, do we, like, what are the innovations that we're missing out on at that point? Like, we cured aging, it's cured, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there's like a delivery mechanism or something that could be improved upon, but like, I don't know. It's you get what I'm saying. It's just so few and far between that I would say forced sale makes sense. That I don't even know if the incentives would really. I don't know if the changing in incentives would matter that much, because it would be such a innovative technology. But it does depend. Like, if it's like the cure for cancer, but it requires, I don't know, a year's worth of very painful shots. You can imagine in that circumstance where, yeah, it does cure cancer, but there's probably some innovations around the delivery mechanism or the dosage or something that, could crop up and make this a more convenient circumstance to get cured from. But, but it's all theoretical, obviously. But
my bigger concern is also going to be where the government forces a sale. Does that mean that the government starts, under some guise, be it national security or, economic supremacy, starts withholding it from certain, markets or certain countries? If we do find a cure for cancer, do we sit there and say, well, we're not giving it to the Chinese or the Russians anytime soon? And it's like, wait a minute here, come on.
Don't we already kind of do that, though, in terms of, like, tariffing and restricting our, right? We've got, like, the CHIPS Act. You've got stuff that kind of guides that.
And it has gotten more aggressive by far. And to some degree, you're right, but there's still to some degree, the free market alternative.
But also to be fair, though, I think what is important to think about is the opposite circumstance, where purely I don't want to say out of spite, it's a strategic reason, but like out of strategic reasons, like we don't want this country to look good, we need to bolster our own government sort of, standard and brand equity, that we don't allow that more innovative technology into our country. The example is like the Chinese government doesn't allow in the Western vaccines, even though they're better. Right, even though it would help Chinese people, they don't allow those in because they think it would make them look bad, right? So in a circumstance where, like, we've developed a cure for cancer, and say that the American government has socialized that cure to everyone in the country, well, does China immediately let that cure in, or do they play oh, we're scrutinizing this, we don't trust it, we need to develop our own cure? Like, it's kind of hard to say which one would happen, of the U.S. not letting them versus like China and Russia not wanting that drug in because it might make them look bad, or it might make the Americans look good.
Yes, but at that point, that becomes a decision on the part of the country at hand to not engage, allow their citizens to deal with the market, versus another government saying a business can't engage with that market.
I mean, I don't know the answer to your question about how the governments would react to such an incredible medical innovation. But I mean, if we use COVID as an example, I don't think there was any conversation of like withholding the Western COVID vaccines from like Russia and China. It seems like the Western actors were perfectly willing to allow that drug to flow into those countries. But I mean, I could be wrong, I guess. I mean, maybe the Russian-Chinese sort of skepticism of the vaccine was just a convenient excuse not to let the drug flow in. But it feels like if we came up with like a cure for cancer, we wouldn't gatekeep that technology super hard. Maybe we would gatekeep the patents, like we would just deliver the drug and not allow them to produce it. But the actual drug itself, I'd be surprised if America was like, we're not going to give our cure for cancer to the Chinese people, because we want to fucking leverage that for government concessions or something.
Sure, but I'll give you a great example. Teva, right? Israeli corporation, one of the biggest generics producers in the world. Okay. Now, what happens if you have a situation where all countries engage in this sort of behavior, and Israel says, well, we're not giving it to Palestinians, right?
Yeah, I think that's where the community. I think it would depend on
the United States, but it's considering all actors as a whole.
I think it would depend on the technology. I think that, or the drug, I should say. I keep saying technology when I'm referring to drugs, but
one of the least fun aspects of this game is how easy it is for somebody to smash down a base and then defend it with zero supply. Like 1 planetary fortress and 10 missile turrets is like, I need like 50 supply to break this base, and they don't have to commit any fucking army to it. And the same thing with Protoss and like shield batteries and cannons. It's so fucking frustrating playing a Zerg to deal with somebody who can like put 2 buildings down, and you need like to bring like the fucking entire like US fucking military to actually take the base down. It's so fucking stupid.
Similar to South Africa would come back and say,
sorry,
you okay, Destiny?
You okay?
No. Sorry, go ahead.
It doesn't sound like it. I think in that circumstance, the international community would come together and say like, we're gonna sanction the absolute shit out of you for this like abhorrent international standard, or it'll be the case that, I don't know, Israeli sells the technology to America, and then America or other countries are like, okay, and we're just going to give it to the Palestinians because what the fuck's wrong with you, Israeli government? Like, of course the Palestinians should have the cure for aging as well. So, but that's what I would imagine would happen in a circumstance like that. It's hard to imagine because it's so innovative.
I would love to think that way, but like I said, there's a lot of those types of situations that we avoid with a private market thing, and just simply incentivizing based on an economic benefit without having to go through that. And that way it becomes deliberate, and there's no rigmarole, there's no politics at play with that, other than the actor who would otherwise receive it. That's kind of what I'm getting at. I
don't know. I maybe this is just me having too much faith in like the broader international community, but if there was a cure for aging that was cheap, easy to take, convenient, it was able to travel easily, across seas, long distances, stuff like that, I just can't imagine the international community would be like, well, we're so scared of making Israel mad that we're not going to deliver this drug to Palestinians. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
I mean,
but,
we've had that problem with existing medical treatments. with additional,
but nothing so grandiose like we're describing, right? Like nothing like a cure for aging. Nothing,
certainly not.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing again, where it gets kind of dicey for medical interventions in Syria, or not Syria, Yemen. And we're also talking about Syria, and we're talking about Ukraine and stuff like that, where people are like, you can't even, the doom and gloom of we're going to jeopardize U.S. interests by even getting involved in a humanitarian effort, which is why organizations like DWB exist, as far as Doctors Without Borders, to sort of skirt the line on that, where people who are qualified...
Doctors Without Borders, that socialist anarchist organization.
I know, I love raising money for them, they're great. But, yeah, it's stuff like that I'm kind of wanting to provide a market solution for. That's all. But yeah, that's about it. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on for this long, but I figured I'd throw in my 2 cents.
For good discussion.
All right, have fun, Destiny.
See you later, buddy.
I think that's all I have to Destiny. It looks like Ragepope has left the call a while ago, so he's
Do you know what like
he's
the
avoided yet
sampling rate
another
on your microphone is, or
debate
why?
with me.
I'm trying to figure out like why you would have this weird the weird noise.
I don't know. I've been trying to figure out why randomly my mic has electricity sounds. It seems like it's cords being close to each other, but it doesn't seem like that's the case all the time. So I don't know how to fix it. So if you have any tips, let me know.
It almost sounds like a sampling, or like if you go to your recording tab and you look at like the microphone, there's like a setting, a drop-down box for sampling shit. Or sample rate, maybe.
Let's see. Try and find it. So like go to my microphone settings.
Yeah, you do like right-click, sounds, something. Under recording tab, find your microphone.
Okay. Microphone access.
I don't think it's that though, because the hissing isn't consistent enough. What kind of microphone are you using?
I'm using an SM7B.
Oh. Never mind.
There's no helping me?
There is. It's just what is your SM7B connected to?
It's connected to a Focusrite.
Okay. Have you ever heard of anything called like a cloud lifter?
I have.
Why don't you have one of those?
I do have one.
Why is it not connected?
It is connected.
Is it between?
It's
Where is it?
It's a SMB to the cloud lifter.
Oh,
and
so
then
you
cloud
just
lifter
you lied
to
to
the
me.
Focusrite.
You didn't. It's not
That's
connected
true.
right to the Focusrite.
I skipped a step.
Gotcha.
You're right.
Okay. On your Focusrite. Oh, dude, it's that shitty ass fucking red box, isn't it? It is.
It is. It's the one.
I can't help you. Yeah, that shit is fucked. Good luck.
So you think it's the mixer? I guess I should get a new mixer.
No, there's some setting or something in there that you can probably change. I'm not sure which one it would be.
Damn. Danny Void says he knows the issue. Well, Danny Void, if you know the issue, let me know, because I've been trying to have consistently. The Focusrite needs to be in single channel. Well, fuck, I don't know how to do that. I don't know, Danny. Danny, DM me on Twitter then, if you can help me. But all right, Destiny. Well, it was fun talking to you. It was fun talking to Ragepope and everybody. And I'll see you and DGG later.
Loser. Where's this fucking AIDS build? Holy shit. Jesus.